All right, guys, so today we are learning about China. We're shifting our focus. I know we've been focusing on our Islamic empires, the Mughal, the Safavid, and the Ottoman, but now we're shifting into another one of our land-based empires during the early modern era, which is the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty will be the first of the Chinese dynasties during the early modern era, and then they will be taken over by the Qing Dynasty, who will follow them. The Qing Dynasty will take over, moving from the north into the Ming Dynasty, and they will conquer the Ming Dynasty, forming the Qing Dynasty, also referred to as Manchu. They will take place from 1644 until 1911. Before we get into the methods of control for the Ming and the Qing Dynasty, let's look at where we've come from. We started with the Tang Dynasty, and then we talked about how they had a crazy period called the Five Dynasties and restored order in China with the Song Dynasty. After the Song Dynasty, however, we didn't necessarily talk about the fact that the Mongols took over China, and they actually called that Khanate the Yuan Dynasty. So the Yuan Dynasty is our in-between, and now today we're going to jump into the Ming Dynasty, who took over after the Yuan Dynasty, and then finally the Qing Dynasty.
In August 1368, the Yuan dynasty fell when an uprising led by Zhu Yuanzhang captured the capital, Beijing. Later that year, Zhu Yuanzhang had himself proclaimed emperor and established the Ming dynasty. The first half of the new dynasty saw agriculture develop to a level never seen before. The improved agricultural technology freed up labor, which in turn encouraged the development of handicrafts industry and commerce. A number of significant cultural advances were made under the Ming Dynasty, symbolized by the Yongle Bell, the Forbidden City, and blue and white porcelain. China also raised its profile on the international stage, thanks in no small part to the great navigator Zheng He. Through his voyages to the western seas, he helped strengthen ties between the Ming Dynasty and the governments in other parts of the world.
During the Ming Dynasty, there were new achievements in architecture, shipbuilding, porcelain making, and textiles. Products made in China were already well known throughout the world for their high quality and supreme craftsmanship. But during the Ming Dynasty, Chinese technology was to reach an unprecedented level. In the process, adding yet more vibrant colors to the civilization of China and the world. The Ming Dynasty was founded in the year 1368, and after a few years of recovering following the overthrow of the previous dynasty, the nation began to thrive once again. In the year 1405, the Ming Emperor proclaimed that a magnificent royal palace would be built in Beijing. Today, that palace is commonly referred to as the Forbidden City. While construction of the new royal palace was underway, more than 300 ships from China, the largest fleet of vessels sent out on a mission of exploration in the history of the planet, was in full sail on the Indian Ocean. This was the first voyage of Zheng He, an envoy of the Ming Emperor, who had been sent out into the western seas. As Zheng He's vessels plied the waves, back in Beijing, 230,000 craftsmen from every conceivable trade were joined by 1 million laborers to start work at the construction sites of the Forbidden City. Officials and their legmen had ventured into remote forests in Sichuan, Hunan and Hubei provinces in search of the very best timber and construction stone. The Emperor of Ming had a dream that his nation would become a formidable power accorded due respect from lands across the ocean. To help him bring this about, the Emperor selected Zheng He to be the commander of a massive fleet, and he was perfect for the job. 35 years old, tall, handsome, courageous and very intelligent, Zheng He had many military feats and accomplishments behind him, and what was more, he was familiar with diplomatic protocol. To accomplish the mission entrusted to him, and before facing a voyage in uncharted waters that was certain to be perilous, Zheng He had first to obtain ships capable of withstanding the demands of such a long journey into the unknown. Between 1403 and 1405, almost every site in the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River in China's southeast was converted into shipyards, and orders were placed for more than 2,000 ships. The Longjiang shipyard in Nanjing became the largest ship construction facility in the world. Timber of all sizes literally flooded into the shipyard via the Yangtze River, and there thousands of workers were ready and waiting to begin work.
造船业实际上它是一个综合的一个科技水平的体现，不是说我光有那么多木头我就能就造一船就行了，或者是我光有这么多钢铁我造一个船就行了。任何一个时代的最高科技的一些的这个元素要用到这个造船上。
Shipbuilding and navigation are like twins, as both require the most advanced technologies in hydromechanics, material mechanics, astronomy, meteorology, and manufacturing. The ability of a nation to build great ships has always mirrored the general level of science and technology in that nation's society. The level of shipbuilding technology achieved during the Ming Dynasty was seen first in the size of the ships produced. The largest type of ship in Zheng He's fleet, known as a treasure boat, was truly massive. At 126.72 meters long and 51.84 meters wide, it was larger than an Olympic-sized soccer field. It had a displacement of 10,000 tons and was able to carry 1,000 people. Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria, built 87 years later, was just 35 meters long, 1/5 the size of one of Zheng He's treasure boats. In the shipyards, the shipbuilders worked day and night. The Longjiang shipyard had many workshops under it, each specializing in a different task, such as carpentry, mechanics, and sail-making. Other items needed, such as ropes and nails, were supplied from elsewhere. From objects unearthed at the shipyard, archaeologists have determined that every piece of timber that arrived in the shipyard was numbered, and this means the shipyard implemented a standardized workflow system, rather like a modern-day assembly line.
In addition to all of these innovations in technologies, we see a lot of continuities from the Song Dynasty to the Ming Dynasty in terms of culture. They kept Neo-Confucianism as their main leading belief system, and they also continued to practice Buddhism as their religion. This continuation of Neo-Confucianism also meant a continuation of the civil service exam, which people would have to pass in order to become scholar bureaucrats within the government of the Ming Dynasty. In terms of economics, the Ming Dynasty continued to trade with neighboring states, as well as participate in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. However, in addition to this, they formalized the tributary system during the Ming Dynasty, which was loose international relations, which focused on China and facilitated trade and foreign relations with neighboring states. You saw earlier Zheng He, who took treasure fleets from the Ming Dynasty to neighboring regions. This showed the power and control of the Ming Dynasty and made other neighboring states fearful of that power. Therefore, they would sign up to be allies with the Ming state, pay tribute to them, which means give them gifts or money, in exchange for the protection and trade relations with the Ming Empire.
The eunuchs, long emasculated in more ways than one, built up a sort of parallel administration and ran politics behind the scenes in the court of the Wanli Emperor. And then both Japan and Portugal pulled silver from international trade. Silver was China's currency, and the sudden stop caused massive inflation and a sort of liquidity crisis as people began hoarding their reserves. As if things couldn't get any worse, the Little Ice Age, a period of extraordinary weather that brought drought in the summer and extreme cold in the winter, destroyed agriculture. There was an epidemic and, to top it all off, an earthquake that is recorded as the worst in world history. In 1556, Nearly 1 million people were crushed in the cave dwellings they inhabited at the time.
Seeing the weakness in the Ming state, a group of nomads from the north of Ming China, called Manchuria, attacked the Ming dynasty and took over the state during this weak time. These Manchu nomads called their dynasty the Qing dynasty. Let's hear more about that now.
The new Qing dynasty started as a proto-state called Manchuria. This was a multiracial mix of tribes in northern China, backed by the Mongols who had ruled China as the Yuan dynasty a few centuries before. These amassed tribes dealt humiliation to the ethnic Han, forcing them to adopt the classic Qing coiffure. Shaved head with a top knot, also known as the Peking pineapple. It was conceived as a sign of loyalty by the rulers, but angered those who saw the decree as a corruption of Confucian ideals of hierarchy.
When they saw the rebellion against this loss of Confucian ideals, they made the choice to continue the focus on these Neo-Confucian ideals in order to create stability within their empire. This meant that they continued things like the civil service exam, scholar bureaucrats, and other things like filial piety.
The two emperors who epitomized the era were the Yongzheng and his son, Qianlong. They were early modern state makers with an eye for foreign relations with Imperial Russia and other states that lasted into the 19th century. The Treaty of Kayakta in 1727 opened up a trade link that exchanged Russian furs for Chinese tea. In the 18th century, European powers launched expansionist pushes across the world. It was the British East India Company that sent a delegation to China in 1793 under Lord George Macartney. In spite of their best efforts, the Chinese were not to be persuaded of the value of opening up their borders. Qianlong told Macartney, "The kings of myriad nations come by land and sea with all sorts of precious things, and consequently, there is nothing we lack. The point is that there could have been so much more." So the Canton system stayed in place. Canton was a southern Chinese port designated as the one place where trade can be conducted with Western powers. It was an attempt to keep foreigners out of China as far as possible, and it worked to a degree. Hong merchants, as they were known, represented a state monopoly run from the so-called Ocean Trading House. All merchants had to report to this excise building on anchoring, and the fixed prices led to a racket that made competition almost impossible. Traders became more and more desperate. Concurrently, the Chinese became more and more suspicious, ushering in a period of xenophobia that would plague Chinese relations until the collapse of the Qing in the early 20th century. Foreigners became known as barbarians. Chinese nationals were forbidden to enter into any sort of trade relation with their putative oppressors, including moneylending. As soon as any foreigner set foot on Chinese soil, they were watched mercilessly. This paranoia smacked of the same mistrust that was beginning to split China itself. Many commentators attribute this to the multi-ethnic beginnings of the Qing, when it was formed by the Yurchen people in the distinct minority. Though the Yurchen and their later state of Manchuria were successful in bringing together disparate groups, they still marked people apart. Army units ran the so-called banner system, where the colour of the troop indicated the race of the soldiers. In their keenness to categorise and distinguish good from bad, the Qing also began to pass judgment on members of society. This is quite unbelievable when you remember the enlightened statesmanship of Emperors Yongzheng and Qianlong.